What do these sequels have in common? Shrek 2, Despicable Me 2, and Across the Spider-Verse. They took everything fans loved about the first movie and made it bigger, deeper, and better. Whereas Ralph Breaks the Internet and Cars 2 try to do the same thing, but something feels off. Like the soul of the story got left behind in the first draft.
Not bad, but not good.
Yeah.
So why is this the case? How do some movies nail their sequels while others go as far as killing the entire franchise? Once you sit down to write a sequel, you have one job first: evolve your characters. If the first film was about who they are, the sequel should be about what they do next. Let's start with Shrek 2, which is still one of the cleanest examples of how to evolve a character without changing who they are totally. The first movie already gave us a strong arc. Shrek began as a lonely ogre who believed he didn't deserve love. Then met Fiona, fought for her, and realized that happiness didn't have to fit anyone's fairy tale rulebook. The ending was perfect. Two outcasts finding each other in a world that mocked them both. But even though it wrapped up neatly, there were still questions left hanging. How do two social outcasts build a life together? How will they face the world that still judges them? And most importantly, if Fiona is a princess, where the heck is her kingdom? Shrek 2 doesn't ignore those questions, but makes them the entire point of the movie. The sequel opens with the newlywed ogres returning from their honeymoon, only to receive a royal invitation to the kingdom of Far, Far Away to meet Fiona's parents, the king and queen.
I'd like you to meet my husband, Shrek.
From that moment, the movie stops being a love story and becomes a test of Shrek and Fiona's love. Meeting the in-laws and seeing Fiona's lavish former life makes Shrek question if he's truly good enough for her, which leads to his misguided decision to drink a potion to turn handsome.
Look out, princess. Here comes the new me.
It sounds like he hasn't evolved from that insecure ogre, right? But this isn't really about Shrek as a person or ogre, but as a partner and a family. Despicable Me 2 makes an even more compelling evolution of its main character. The first film establishes Gru as a supervillain who, through the process of adopting 3 orphans, discovers a greater love than world domination: fatherhood. By the end, he's traded his freeze ray for bedtime stories. So what's the next step? You can't just make him a villain again, right? Yup, because that would be a reset. Therefore, Despicable Me 2 expands Gru's character by giving him a new challenge, using his villain skills for good. He is kidnapped by Agent Lucy Wilde of the Anti-Villain League, who needs his expertise to track down a stolen mutagen. Crucially, Gru is initially reluctant. He's happy being a single dad, running a jam business, and being devoted to his girls. This is hilarious and perfect character consistency. And he only takes the job after his old partner, Dr. Nefario, quits because Gru is no longer a real supervillain. However, the evolution comes from an external force that leverages his unique skills while also expanding his domestic life with romance. The sequel, therefore, uses his previous growth as the foundation for his new life as a hero and a love interest. The original Despicable Me proved Gru could be a dad. The sequel proves he can be a man. The rule is simple. The best sequels pick up the thread of the character's growth and pull it somewhere honest. When a studio ignores this first rule, you get what happened to Ralph Breaks the Internet. The original Wreck-It Ralph was a beautiful story about Ralph, a literal video game villain, accepting his role as the bad guy and finding friendship with Vanellope. His core growth was learning that being the bad guy doesn't mean he's a bad person, and that his value isn't tied to the approval of others. So how does the sequel evolve this? Well, it doesn't. It immediately makes Ralph forget every single step of that journey. Ralph Breaks the Internet takes our grown, self-actualized hero and regresses him into a clingy, insecure, jealous mess. The story is basically about Ralph and Vanellope going onto the internet to find a replacement steering wheel. But the real conflict is internal, and it's a total repeat of Ralph's attachment issues from the first movie. We see him acting overbearing and possessive, desperately trying to keep things exactly as they were, despite the obvious fact that Vanellope is bored with her old routine and excited by the new high-octane racing game, Slaughter Race. So what does he do? He creates a literal virus designed to stop her from leaving, and that is where the character assassination is complete. But what's worse is that the movie's hypocrisy is staggering when you look at Vanellope's arc. She decides she wants to leave Sugar Rush for Slaughter Race, whereas in the first movie, King Candy went turbo by forcing his way into Sugar Rush, causing the game to break and nearly get unplugged. But here was Vanellope doing the exact same thing. She essentially goes turbo too, trying to force her way into a new game.
Not exactly innocent here. You were gonna ditch everybody. Sugar Rush.
Oh, please, I'm one of 16 racers.
What's even crazier is that she ultimately succeeds by having the other game's code rewritten by Shank. Yet the film frames Vanellope as the free spirit who can do no wrong, while Ralph is blamed for toxic masculinity. Ralph is the sole bad guy for having attachment issues that are fully explained by his backstory of being alone and miserable for 50 years. Vanellope is never made to face the consequences of her actions. She never tells her friends in Sugar Rush she's leaving, and she faces no repercussions for almost breaking her own game again. The message becomes that Vanellope is justified in being selfish and running off, but Ralph is wrong for having a natural, even though misguided fear of losing the one person who ever cared about him. The setting itself doesn't help. The film buries all this under layers of pop culture noise. There's so much internet jargon, meme humor, and corporate cameos that it starts to feel like a brand showcase instead of a story. You have viral videos, algorithm jokes, a trip to Oh My Disney, and cameos from the princesses that add nothing but fluff. It's loud, colorful, and soulless. It's as if the studio didn't trust the emotional story to carry itself, so they covered it in online glitter. And that brings us to the second rule of sequel survival, one that Ralph's sequel also completely forgot. The second rule is simple: expand the world, don't replace it. Ralph Breaks the Internet already flops here, but no one broke this rule better than Cars 2. A sequel needs to show us more of the universe we fell in love with, rather than swap the story's setting and genre for something louder and more marketable. When a film tries to chase novelty at the cost of its identity, it's a betrayal of the core promise the franchise made. The original Cars was an unexpectedly warm and heartfelt story. It centered on the rookie hotshot race car, Lightning McQueen, who, while trying to get to a major race, accidentally gets stuck in the forgotten desert town of Radiator Springs on Route 66. The whole story is a beautiful interpretation of slowing down, learning humility, and appreciating community, history, and friendship. The heart of the movie was the quiet, cozy nostalgia of the small town, the electrifying racing, and the mentorship Lightning receives from the wise old Doc Hudson. It was, at its core, a simple, character-driven American fable, whereas Cars 2 took that small-town fable and threw it into a global, frantic, nonsensical international spy movie. Instead of expanding on racing or exploring the dynamics of Radiator Springs, the film suddenly shifts focus entirely. Chances are, when you first started seeing the movie, you thought you had mistakenly tuned into something else. This is because it starts with a scene straight out of an action flick. But the plot later turns to Lightning McQueen, entering the newly created World Grand Prix, an international race designed to promote an alternative fuel. Okay, cool, we're back to what we know, racing and McQueen. However, once the cars get to Tokyo, the story immediately pivots away from racing when Mater, the rusty tow truck and comic relief, is mistaken for a highly intelligent American spy. This is where the film abandons the emotional, grounded tone of the original for gadgets, explosions, and globe-trotting espionage. The cozy nostalgia of Route 66 is completely replaced by loud, confusing chase sequences in Tokyo, Italy, and London. To make matters worse, the shift in genre forced a catastrophic character shift. Lightning McQueen, the main character and emotional anchor, is relegated to a side plot about his racing rivalry with the Italian Francesco Bernoulli. Instead, the focus is placed entirely on Mater. Mater's defining characteristic is his extreme, sincere stupidity, but to suddenly make him the central figure in an espionage plot is just nonsensical. His level of stupidity was now annoying rather than funny when it became the driving force of the entire film. The failure to expand the world also meant the film completely missed key emotional opportunities. The death of Doc Hudson, a pivotal mentor character from the first film, is barely touched upon. When Doc's actor Paul Newman passed away before the sequel, Pixar had a real emotional thread to follow. They could have made a story about Lightning dealing with loss, maybe trying to honor Doc's memory while mentoring someone new. They could have shown how Radiator Springs was recovering, how fame changed Lightning, or how the racing world evolved. Instead, Doc's death was brushed aside in a single line. The movie ignored its strongest roots and built something entirely disconnected. The damage was so severe that even Cars 3, which tried desperately to return to the core themes of racing, mentorship, and legacy, couldn't fully recover the audience's trust. The sequel broke the world, and by doing so, it killed the emotional engine of the franchise. Cars 2 is rightly criticized as the worst Pixar movie ever, hitting an abysmal 40% on Rotten Tomatoes, the lowest rating the studio has ever received by a considerable margin. This isn't because it was a bad spy movie, but because it was a catastrophic failure as a Cars sequel. Now, compare that to something like How to Train Your Dragon 2. The first film introduced Berk, a scrappy Viking village where dragons were the enemy. Hiccup was the misfit who proved everyone wrong by befriending a dragon, Toothless. It ended with the town learning to live alongside dragons, a perfect conclusion. But instead of jumping genres or tone, the sequel asked the right question. What happens to that kind of peace when the world gets bigger? The second film opens 5 years later, and Berk has evolved naturally. It is now a bustling, thriving dragon rider society. New additions like dragon stables and flying contraptions feel like natural developments. The world has expanded technologically and culturally, but the tone, adventurous, earnest, and deeply emotional, remains entirely intact. Dragons are now part of everyday life, and kids race them through the sky for sport. Hiccup even talks about how bigger the world has become in the opening scenes.
Because with Vikings on the backs of dragons, the world just got a whole lot bigger.
Now older, Hiccup spends his time exploring new lands, mapping the unknown, and asking bigger questions about who he is. The emotional core, his bond with Toothless, and his struggle for identity remain central. But this sequel also dares to scale up. It introduces a new kind of enemy in Drago Bloodfist, who hates and enslaves dragons.
You belong to me now.
The stakes evolve from can humans and dragons coexist to can they unite the world before someone tears it apart? And it works because it grows naturally out of the first movie's message. Importantly, every expansion in How to Train Your Dragon 2 serves Hiccup's central and internal journey of identity and leadership. Discovering his long-lost mother, Valka, a woman who has become the guardian of a massive dragon sanctuary, adds an entirely new, fascinating culture to the world and helps Hiccup understand his own destiny. When Hiccup's father, Stoic, is tragically killed, it is an immense personal consequence that immediately forces Hiccup to stop running from his destiny and step up as the leader of Berk. The world has grown, the danger is greater, and the cost is higher, but the story never stops being about Hiccup, Toothless, and the powerful, unique bond between them. The film uses world expansion to raise the emotional bar, rather than distract from it. But while expanding the world and developing the character are great ways to not kill a franchise, missing this next rule can still ruin the sequel. In fact, this third rule should have probably come first because of how important it is. So basically, it's about making the conflict personal, and no sequel does it better than Across the Spider-Verse. The original Into the Spider-Verse was about Miles Morales, a regular kid from Brooklyn being bitten by a radioactive spider and learning that anyone can wear the mask. His journey was about accepting the trauma of losing his universe's Peter Parker, ending in him mastering his powers and finally embracing his identity as his own unique Spider-Man. The stakes were high, but they were about Miles' own self-acceptance. Across the Spider-Verse takes that self-acceptance and uses it as the launchpad for a conflict that is so deeply personal, so perfectly structured, it's one of the greatest animated sequels ever made.
Let's do things differently this time. Like, so differently.
The plot is complex, involving Miles traveling to the headquarters of the Spider Society, an organization dedicated to protecting the multiverse. It is led by the intense Miguel O'Hara. The main antagonist, Spot, begins as a pathetic joke, a villain created by Miles in the first film during the Collider incident. But his escalating power is merely the catalyst for the real personal conflict. That conflict is between Miles' right to choose his own path and the rigid, suffocating dogma of the Spider Society. Miguel O'Hara explains that every Spider-Person's story contains canon events, key moments of loss, like the death of a police captain close to Spider-Man, that must happen to ensure the survival of that specific universe. The moment Miles discovers this, the entire movie flips from an action-adventure to a terrifying existential dilemma. Why? Because the person destined to die in Miles' life is his own father, Police Captain Jeff Morales.
I'm sorry, Miles.
Send me home.
I can't do that. Not now.
You see how the stakes aren't just about saving the multiverse anymore, but also about saving his dad? This is how you personalize a conflict. The villain, Spot, is set to kill Jeff, and Miguel O'Hara's entire society is prepared to let it happen, even imprisoning Miles to prevent him from interfering. This is the definition of personal stakes. The hero is literally fighting against fate, and against the people he cherishes, to prevent the most devastating loss of his life. Every punch thrown, every chase sequence, and every new Spider character is tied directly to this agonizing choice. But it gets better. When Miles learns the truth, that the spider that bit him came from another dimension, making him an anomaly, the conflict becomes existential. Now he's fighting a villain, a society, and the notion that his story doesn't count.
You're not supposed to be Spider-Man!
No! You're lying! I'm Spider-Man!
You're a mistake!
That shatters his belief in himself. Suddenly, it's not just I have powers, but do I belong? Was I a mistake? His father's career, Gwen's support, the multiverse collapse, everything bears down on him. That's the kind of sequel that uses scale without losing personal meaning. The world is huge, but the heart is still Miles' story. But do you know what's crazy? There was still room for another deeply personalized conflict. Gwen Stacy, Miles' love interest, and one of his strongest advocates in the first film, finds herself estranged from her own father after he spent months hunting Spider-Woman, unaware she was his daughter. But when Gwen resolves that conflict, she immediately faces a new one with Miles, supporting Miguel's canon to prevent Miles from going home, believing she's protecting the multiverse. This support is a betrayal that makes Miles' flight from the Spider Society even more painful. the emotional complexity is dialed up. The conflict is about control, choice, and belonging, and it comes from the people Miles most looked up to. The brilliance of Across the Spider-Verse is that it makes the vastness of the multiverse feel utterly intimate. The threat is universal collapse, yes, but the reason we care is because universal collapse is tied directly to the death of one single important man, Miles's father. This is a profound character-driven dilemma that forces Miles to claim his identity as the only Spider-Man who can rewrite the rules. He and Hobie, anyway. But yeah, that's how you raise the stakes emotionally, creating a perfect sequel that builds on the hero's foundation and forces them to make the most agonizing personal choice possible. When a movie forgets this, you get a sequel that is less a story and more an anthology of cute characters, which brings us to the failure of The Secret Life of Pets 2. The original introduced us to Max, a comfortable terrier who learned to overcome his jealousy and share his life with the newly adopted Newfoundland, Duke. The whole movie was a simple, high-energy domestic comedy about anxiety, loyalty, and companionship, culminating in a found family unit. The sequel, however, immediately breaks the rule by refusing to present a single unifying personal challenge. Instead of facing one major conflict, the movie splits its characters into 3 virtually unrelated mini-plots, making it feel less like a cohesive film and more like short cartoon specials stitched together. The first story focuses on Max, whose anxiety about his owner's new baby, Liam, leads him to a farm where a tough dog named Rooster challenges him to toughen up. Separately, Max's friend Gidget, the love-struck Pomeranian, embarks on a completely different subplot. She is trying to retrieve Max's favorite toy from a cat-guarded apartment, forcing her to learn to act like a cat. Finally, the white rabbit, Snowball, is busy in his own storyline, attempting to free a caged white tiger from an abusive circus owner. There is no clear antagonist and no central emotional test for Max that drives the entire narrative. Max's anxiety is personal, but it only plays out in a contained, low-stakes storyline on the farm, entirely separate from the other 2 plots. The film substitutes character development with a checklist of cute, brand-friendly scenarios designed to showcase the main characters in new situations. The 3 stories are separate streams that barely converge, and when they do, it's often in a forced way. Like when Snowball's caged tiger is suddenly transported onto a train near Max's farm. The entire experience feels like an activity rather than a story, where the hero's core identity is never challenged. This is why the movie is easily forgettable. So, as a writer, if you can evolve your character without resetting them, expand their world without replacing it, and keep the conflict personal, you would have succeeded in not killing a franchise. But perhaps something that doesn't get talked about enough, which is also very important, is to prioritize genuine stories over politics and money. Unfortunately, that is becoming harder to do by the day, and it's another reason why franchises lose their audience over time. Here's the crazy truth though, all these sequels rely on one thing, a solid first movie, and that most times means a memorable villain. We love a great bad guy, but what we really can't forget is their final moment, that spectacular crash out. This video here shows you exactly how to write a villain crash out that works.